Graduation is supposed to be the one day your family shows up no matter what. The day all the excuses stop. But as I stood there in my cap and gown, scanning a crowd full of proud parents and cameras flashing, I already knew my mom wasn't coming. She had chosen my brother's backyard barbecue instead. Again. That was the moment something inside me shut down completely. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't confront her. I simply decided that if I was invisible to my family, then I would disappear on my own terms. I learned very early in life that my role in our family was to be flexible, understanding, quiet. My brother, Mark, was the center of gravity in our house. His moods dictated dinner plans. His mistakes became learning experiences. His achievements were framed photos on every wall. Mine were polite nods and reminders not to get too full of myself. Mom never said she loved him more. She didn't have to. It showed in the way she dropped everything when he called. In the way she rearranged holidays around his schedule. In the way she asked me to compromise, always me, never him. If Mark forgot my birthday, it was just how he is. If I missed one of his events, it was a character flaw. By high school, I stopped expecting fairness. I told myself independence was strength. That not needing anyone made me mature. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I had learned not to expect love where it was never consistently offered. Graduation was supposed to be different. It wasn't just a ceremony to me. It was proof that I had survived everything quietly. Scholarships, late-night jobs, exhaustion, and loneliness. I didn't ask for a party. I didn't ask for gifts. I asked for one thing. Please be there, I told my mom months in advance. She smiled and said, of course. I wanted to believe her. I really did. 2 weeks before graduation, Mom mentioned the barbecue casually, like it was nothing. Mark's hosting something at his place that weekend, she said, stirring her coffee. Just a small get-together. My stomach tightened immediately. That's the same day as my graduation, I said. She paused. Not in confusion, calculation. Well, yes, she said slowly, but your ceremony is only a couple of hours. The barbecue is more flexible. I waited for her to laugh. To say she was joking. She didn't. I really need you there, I said. I hated how small my voice sounded. This is important to me. She sighed like I was asking too much. Christy, you'll have plenty of moments like this in life. Mark doesn't host often. Family will already be there. Family. The word stung. I reminded her that Mark had skipped my scholarship dinner. My award ceremony. My birthday the year before. This is different, she said. You know how sensitive he is. Sensitive. That word had always been his shield. The conversation ended the way they always did. With me backing down. With her promising she'd try to make it work. But deep down, I already knew the outcome. I had lived this pattern too many times to pretend otherwise. Still, I ironed my gown. I charged my phone. I left a seat empty for her in my mind. Hope is stubborn like that. The morning of my graduation was quiet. Too quiet. I checked my phone before I even got out of bed. No message. No good luck. No on my way. By the time I arrived at the venue, families were hugging, crying, taking pictures. I stood off to the side, adjusting my cap alone, telling myself she was just running late. When my name was called, I walked across the stage and accepted my diploma. The applause washed over me, but it felt hollow. I looked into the crowd one last time. Her seat was empty. After the ceremony, I finally checked my phone again. One notification. A photo. Mark's backyard. Smoke rising from the grill. Laughter. A caption from my mom, family time. That was it. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what she missed. Something inside me went still. Not broken. Not angry. Just done. I didn't cry in the parking lot like I thought I would. I drove home in silence, removed my cap, and set it on the passenger seat like an object from someone else's life. That night, while everyone else celebrated milestones, I sat alone and made a decision that would change everything. If my absence didn't matter to them, then my presence never would. The days after graduation were strangely normal for everyone except me. Mom didn't call to apologize. Mark didn't text congratulations. The family group chat stayed active, filled with photos from the barbecue I hadn't been invited to enjoy emotionally, only witness digitally. I told myself to wait. To give them time. Surely someone would realize how badly they'd hurt me. No one did. A week passed. Then 2. When Mom finally called, it wasn't to ask how I was coping. It was to complain about how exhausted she felt hosting family events and how Mark needed help cleaning up after the barbecue. "You could have helped if you hadn't rushed off that day," she said lightly. I almost laughed. Instead, I realized something terrifyingly clear. In her version of events, nothing had gone wrong. My graduation was just another minor scheduling inconvenience she'd successfully worked around. That night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by unopened congratulatory cards from friends and professors. Every message told me how proud they were. Everyone felt heavier because it didn't come from the people who were supposed to care the most. That's when the sadness finally burned off and left something sharper behind. Clarity. I didn't want an apology anymore. I didn't want acknowledgement. I wanted peace, and I knew I wouldn't find it if I stayed accessible. So I started planning quietly. No announcements. No dramatic speeches. Just a slow, deliberate exit. I didn't cut contact all at once. That would have raised questions. Instead, I practiced absence. I replied slower. I stopped initiating calls. I skipped family dinners with polite excuses about work. When Mom noticed, she framed it as independence. "Look at you," she said once. "So busy. You don't need us anymore." She didn't realize how true that was becoming. I deleted old photos from my phone. Changed my social media privacy settings. Quietly removed my last name from public profiles. Each small step felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The biggest change came when I legally started the process of changing my name. Not out of spite, but survival. My last name felt heavy. Like carrying a brand that reminded me who I was expected to be. Someone flexible. Someone forgiving. Someone who never demanded equal treatment. When the paperwork went through, I stared at the confirmation email for a long time. No fireworks. No tears. Just a calm sense of reclaiming something I'd never truly owned. My identity. I didn't tell my family. I wanted the silence to speak for me. And it did. They stopped calling altogether. Weeks turned into months. Holidays passed. Invitations stopped arriving. I watched from a distance as my absence was absorbed effortlessly into the family rhythm. That hurt, but it also confirmed everything I needed to know. I wasn't missed. I was replaced by convenience. It took nearly 6 months for my disappearance to register. The call came on a random Tuesday evening. Unknown number. "Christy," my aunt's voice asked, uneasy. "Your mom can't reach you. She says your phone's been disconnected." "It hasn't," I said calmly. "I just stopped answering." Silence. Apparently, Mom had tried to send me a birthday card. It came back undelivered. She couldn't tag me on social media. My name didn't come up in searches. Someone finally asked the question no one had cared to ask before. Where did Christy go? Mom left a voicemail later that night. Her voice was confused, not remorseful. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You didn't even tell us you were upset." I listened to the message twice. Not once did she mention graduation. Or the barbecue. Or choosing Mark over me. She framed my absence as cruelty. That's when I understood something crucial. If I reappeared, the story would become about my silence, not their neglect. So I didn't respond. The next call came from Mark. His tone was irritated, not concerned. "You're really going to ghost the family over one missed event?" he scoffed. One missed event. That phrase echoed in my head long after the call ended. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted access restored. And I wasn't willing to pay that price anymore. Once they realized I wasn't coming back quietly, the narrative shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't the forgotten daughter, I was the problem. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out, not to ask how I was, but to tell me how hurt my mom was. How confused. How worried. They spoke as if my disappearance had come out of nowhere, a random act of cruelty rather than the final step in a long pattern of neglect. She did her best, one cousin told me. She didn't mean it like that, another said. You know how Mark is, they all repeated. It was surreal listening to people defend a moment they hadn't even witnessed. No one asked why missing my graduation hurt so much. No one asked how it felt to see my own mother post barbecue photos while I stood alone in a parking lot holding a diploma that changed my life. They only asked one question. Why can't you just let it go? That question finally snapped something loose in me. Because letting it go had been my entire childhood. Because forgiveness had always been demanded before accountability. Because silence was the only boundary I'd ever been allowed to set. I realized then that my absence wasn't punishment, it was exposure. Without me around to absorb discomfort, the family had to face it themselves. And they hated that. I wasn't being chased because I was loved. I was being chased because my silence disrupted their comfort. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about that. Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced one afternoon. I watched from behind the door as she knocked, growing increasingly frustrated when I didn't answer. I knew it was her. I recognized the rhythm. The entitlement. She left a note taped crookedly to the door. We need to talk like adults. You can't just disappear. I stared at that sentence for a long time. I had tried to talk like an adult for years. I had explained. Requested. Compromised. Begged. Every time, I was told I was being dramatic or selfish or too sensitive. Now that I had chosen silence, that was suddenly immature. She called later that night, her voice sharp with anger barely masked as concern. You're embarrassing me, she said. People are asking questions. There it was. The real issue. Not my pain. Not my graduation. Not what she'd missed. Her image. I almost told her everything then. Almost listed every moment I'd swallowed disappointment to keep the peace. Almost explained how lonely it felt to never be chosen. But I stopped myself. Because I finally understood something crucial, explaining myself would not change her. It would only give her something to argue against. So I said nothing. I blocked the number. That was the moment my absence became permanent. Not because I hated her, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop begging for space in my own family. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. It became quieter. Slower. More honest. I stopped measuring my worth by who showed up for me and started noticing who stayed without being asked. Friends became family. Small victories felt bigger without anyone minimizing them. I framed my diploma and hung it where I could see it every morning. Not as a reminder of what I lost, but of what I earned on my own. Sometimes I wondered if they missed me now. If Mom ever scrolled through old photos and noticed the gap where I should have been. If Mark ever realized how easy it was for everyone to choose him. But I didn't reach out. Because healing doesn't require closure from people who never listened in the first place. The truth is, erasing myself from the family didn't make me invisible. It made me visible to myself. I learned that being chosen starts with choosing yourself. That peace isn't loud or dramatic, it's steady. And that walking away can be the bravest form of self-respect. I didn't disappear. I finally arrived. A year after my graduation, I ran into someone from my extended family at a grocery store. She hesitated when she saw me, like she wasn't sure if I was real. Oh, she said slowly. You're doing okay? That question told me everything. They had built a version of me in their heads where I was miserable, bitter, regretful. A cautionary tale about what happens when you abandon family. It made their choices easier to live with. I'm doing great, I replied honestly. She looked startled. Apparently, my mother had been telling people that I was struggling. That I'd isolated myself. That I was being stubborn and would come around eventually. Not once had she admitted she chose a barbecue over my graduation. Not once had she said my absence was the result of her own decisions. In her story, I vanished without reason. For the first time, I corrected it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. I just stated facts. About the graduation. About the photo. About how often I'd been asked to understand while no one ever tried to understand me. The woman didn't argue. She just nodded slowly. That was when I realized something important: the truth had always been enough. I just hadn't been allowed to say it without consequences before. I didn't follow up with anyone else. I didn't send explanations or emails. I didn't demand apologies. I let the truth exist without me babysitting people's reactions. That was my final act of letting go. People assume cutting off family means you're angry forever. That you wake up each day fueled by resentment. The reality is quieter. I don't wake up thinking about my mom or my brother at all. I wake up thinking about my work, my friends, the life I built when I stopped waiting for permission to matter. Sometimes people ask if I regret it. If I'll reconnect someday. I tell them the same thing every time. I didn't leave because of one barbecue. I left because that barbecue symbolized a lifetime of being optional. Going back would mean shrinking again. Explaining again. Accepting apologies that don't come with change. It would mean returning to a role that was designed for my silence, not my happiness. I chose differently. I chose a life where milestones are celebrated, not minimized. Where love isn't conditional on how convenient I am. Where I don't have to disappear to be at peace. If my family ever truly understands what they lost, it won't be because I came back to explain it. It will be because they finally felt the absence they always assumed I'd tolerate. And if they never understand? That's okay too. Because healing doesn't require their awareness. It only required my decision to stop waiting. Walking away from my family wasn't about punishment. It was about survival. I didn't erase myself to hurt them, I erased myself to finally exist without apology. Missing my graduation showed me where I stood, but leaving showed me who I could become. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't confronting the people who hurt you, it's choosing peace when they never choose you. I didn't lose my family that day. I found myself, and that was worth everything. Walking away didn't fix everything overnight. I wish it had. I wish there had been a dramatic sense of relief the moment I chose distance, like some emotional switch flipped and everything felt lighter. But real healing doesn't work like that. It unfolds quietly, in moments so small you almost miss them. At first, I still flinched whenever my phone rang. I still checked unknown numbers. I still rehearsed conversations in my head that I knew I would never have. Years of being ignored don't disappear just because you finally set a boundary. They linger in the body. In the way you hesitate before celebrating yourself. In the way you expect disappointment before joy. But slowly, things began to change. I noticed I laughed more freely around people who didn't need me to be smaller. I stopped explaining myself preemptively. I stopped bracing for emotional impact after sharing good news. There was no one waiting to remind me not to get carried away. No one waiting to redirect attention back to my brother or someone else's needs. For the first time in my life, my milestones belonged fully to me. I started redefining what family meant. Not through blood, but through consistency. Through people who showed up when they said they would. People who celebrated without comparison. People who didn't treat my presence like an inconvenience. And the strangest part? I realized how little effort love actually requires when it's real. No negotiations. No emotional bargaining. No reminders. Just presence. There were moments, of course, when guilt crept in. Late nights when I wondered if I had been too harsh. Too final. Too unforgiving. Society teaches us that family should be endured at all costs, that distance is cruelty, that silence is betrayal. But every time I questioned myself, I returned to one truth. I did not leave because I was angry. I left because I was exhausted. Exhausted from hoping. Exhausted from explaining. Exhausted from being patient with people who never learned. If someone has to lose access to you in order to understand your value, then access was always the problem. I also learned that closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from contrast. From seeing how calm life can be when you're no longer navigating emotional landmines. From realizing how much energy you were spending managing other people's feelings while neglecting your own. And yes, sometimes I imagine my mom finally understanding. I imagine her replaying that day in her head. The graduation. The barbecue. The choice she didn't think mattered. But that imagined realization is no longer something I wait for. Because waiting was the habit that nearly erased me. What surprised me most was how invisible my absence initially was, and how loud it became over time. When I stopped showing up, the family dynamics shifted. Conversations stalled. Roles changed. The emotional labor I had always carried quietly was suddenly missing. I wasn't dramatic when I left. But my absence was undeniable. And that taught me something powerful: you don't have to scream to make an impact. Sometimes the quietest exits are the ones that echo the longest. If someone watching this recognizes themselves in my story, I want them to know this: choosing yourself does not make you selfish. It makes you honest. And honesty is threatening to people who benefit from your silence. You are allowed to outgrow spaces that only value you when you're convenient. You are allowed to stop explaining pain to people who keep minimizing it. And you are allowed to leave, even when no one understands why. Especially then. I didn't erase myself out of spite. I erased myself so I could finally be whole. And that decision didn't make me alone. It made me free.